for this very important subcommittee hearing. I want to first thank my colleagues, members of the House Judiciary Committee, my esteemed chairman, my colleague from New York, Chairman Gerald Nadler, my esteemed colleague Joe Neguse from Colorado, my sister in service from Texas, Sheila Jackson-Lee, and my sister in service, also esteemed colleagues, and Pramila Jayapal is from Seattle, Washington. We are here today for an immigration subcommittee hearing, and we're having two panels. And we are having a long overdue, badly needed, very significant conversation with experts about what is happening in our country today under the Trump administration, his immigration policies, and the anti-immigrant rhetoric that is fueling domestic terrorism. El Paso is the most appropriate place, unfortunately, for having this dialogue, for having this hearing. And we are the most appropriate place because we have been ground zero for both of those issues, for the anti-immigrant policies that the Department of Homeland Security has executed here, as well as the anti-immigrant rhetoric that the president has aimed at migrants, at people of color, and at communities like ours that open their arms to the stranger and take care of the vulnerable. I am proud once again that El Paso is showing the best of who she is in this hearing by helping lead this dialogue, this important dialogue, but it would not happen without the leadership and the incredible dedication that the colleagues around me have demonstrated every step of the way. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our chairman, Jerry Nadler, so that he can say a few words. And each one of my colleagues will have their turn at the podium, and then we'll answer questions. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. Let me first thank Congresswoman Escobar for hosting us here and for urging us to do this field hearing in El Paso. This community is in many ways at the center of the drama about immigration we're having now. But it's not just a drama, it's torturing people. It's a shame, it's a disgrace on the name and the record of this country. It's been said that we are a nation of immigrants, and unless we are descended from Native Americans, of immigrants, in some cases, in many cases, not too many generations ago. So we have to bear that in mind. We should also bear in mind that the most oft-repeated commandment in the Bible, 52 times it says, "Thou," in one formulation or another, "Thou shalt not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The most often repeated commandment, and we are now in the Trump administration systematically violating and making a mockery of the biblical commandment. We're also making a mockery of the laws of the United States. And that is not something that the government of the United States should do. We hear an administration whose rhetoric is hateful, whose rhetoric labels immigrants as dangerous, as thugs, as criminals, as rapists, which characterizes people seeking political asylum, fleeing violence, fleeing persecution, as our laws give them the right to do, and the right to a hearing on the validity of their claim of persecution. And instead they are denounced as an invading force, as an invasion, an infestation, language that reminds us of language we heard in Europe in the 1930s. This is not the first time in American history. If you look at American history, we've been very welcoming to immigrants at some points in time, but at others, there was similar rhetoric directed at, in historical order, the Irish, Catholics in general, Chinese, Asians, Jews, Italians, Greeks, Eastern Europeans, just about everybody except, even Germans early, just about everybody except white Anglo-Saxon Protestants from England have faced this kind of hostility at one time or another. We're always ashamed of it afterwards, but we ought to learn not to do it in the first place. The hateful rhetoric coming from the administration has led to also hateful policies and harmful policies. And we will be discussing today these policies and the effects in the real world here, which is one of the epicenters of this. We'll be discussing the effects of the migrant protection protocols, so-called migrant protection protocols, which makes a mockery of, that's where people claiming asylum have to stay in Mexico. It makes a mockery of international law and of the law of the United States, which provides that anyone can claim political asylum in the United States. Not anybody can get it, but anybody can come here and claim it. The metering of asylum seekers, where we're saying you cannot cross the border at a legal entry point because we only want 10 a day or 20 a day or whatever. And then when people are turned away repeatedly and they go a few hundred yards away and cross illegally, then they're criminals. This makes a mockery of our laws also. The maltreatment of children, separating children from their parents, keeping children, and for that matter, keeping adults in facilities that are way overcrowded, unhygienic, no proper facilities for keeping the temperature at a reasonable level, no blankets, no toothpaste, no diapers for the children, inhuman. I've been in El Paso 3 times in the last 9 months to look at some of these facilities to see what's going on here, and in other places on the border. And I hope this hearing will shed further light on the effects of these policies and will enable us to hopefully change these policies and to make the United States again what it ought to be, a free and open society which welcomes people with a proper claim of political asylum and obeys our own laws on immigration and on everything else. This administration is above all a lawless administration, and we have to hold it, and one of Congress's jobs is to hold it accountable. So I'm glad again. I appreciate Congressman Escobar's inviting us here for this field hearing here, and I'll turn the microphone over to, who's next? Pramila? I think you're next.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Pramila Jayapal. I represent Washington's 7th Congressional District, and I have the great honor of serving as the Vice Chair of the Immigration Subcommittee. And I want to just start by saying how fortunate El Paso is to have Representative Escobar in Congress. It has been a true honor. We also have the opportunity to serve as the co-chairs of the Women's Working Group on Immigration. And I will tell you, your Congresswoman El Paso is brilliant, kind, compassionate, strategic, and has shown over and over again in the last 7 months how incredibly well she represents this district, and in particularly challenging circumstances. So I thank the residents of El Paso for electing such a wonderful colleague. And I'm thrilled to be joining all of my colleagues here for this important field hearing. I have worked on immigration issues for over 20 years, and in last December, I went to Tijuana shortly after metering started. And I actually spoke with people and watched and tried to accompany asylum seekers who were coming across the border. I want to make it clear, and I hope one of the things we get to in our hearing today is that there are many other ways to deal with surges of migrants across the border. We have done that in the past. We will be able to do it again in the future, but without the cruelty that these policies have. And in fact, many of the problems we're seeing are because these policies have been put in place. And so watching the difficulty of people who are coming to seek asylum, which by the way is legal both within our laws that somebody can cross the border and ask for asylum, but also in terms of our, as signatories to international human rights treaties. So this is a legal right for people to seek refuge and to seek asylum. There are many ways of processing asylum seekers. Remain in Mexico and metering are two of the most cruel ways to do that, and also, by the way, extremely ineffective and costing the taxpayer, the American taxpayer, huge amounts of money. So yesterday, I think I'm one of the very few, perhaps the only member of Congress who has now gone to an MPP court. I hadn't actually been. I've been to many other immigration courts over my course of working on this issue. I've seen the mass deportation courts that were set up at the border, but I had not seen what is called Migration Protection Protocol, which I would just say is really a misnomer, MPP. Those courts operate. And what I saw was about 300 people every day coming into your courts here in El Paso, 5 courtrooms, 5 judges, and almost none of them, I think we counted 16 or 20 people who had legal representation. So yes, it's a court. Yes, it's supposed to be due process, but immigration law is incredibly complex. Asylum law is extremely complex. And these folks are being bussed in from Mexico, where they're being forced to stay, probably after they've been metered, and then given no opportunity to really present a case before a judge because they don't have an attorney to walk them through the process. So I hope we have a chance to get into some of these factors here, because I think even beyond the cruelty of these policies, we have to look at what these policies do to our democracy, what they do to our constitutional and foundational values as a country to provide fairness and due process to people as they navigate this system. And so I'm very grateful to Representative Escobar for having us here. And I just want to say to the people of El Paso that you know, originally this field hearing was just going to be on the border policies. Obviously, the tragic massacre in August has made this a dual hearing, dual purpose hearing with 2 things that are deeply tied together: white nationalist terrorism directed at immigrants. These policies of the Trump administration, we have to understand, are fueling the white nationalist terrorism. And so I think we'll have an opportunity to get into that as well. And with that, it is a great honor to introduce my dear sister from another mother, as we say, your Congresswoman also from Texas, and such a long-standing member of tremendous integrity and justice, Sheila Jackson-Lee.
Thank you, Congresswoman, very much. We're delighted to welcome our colleagues to Texas. We are Texas proud, but we are more than Texas proud. We are linked by our very spirits to El Paso strong. And I start with my recognition and acknowledgement for the heinousness of which this community has experienced, but also the strength of this community. And to say to Congresswoman Escobar, one never knows what challenges one will face. No one knows the timing. And I would offer to say that your Congresswoman was a woman for a time such as these. And we cannot thank you enough, Congresswoman Escobar, for your leadership here, but also your leadership in the nation. I spent time here with your Congresswoman in attending 2 funerals, or a funeral of 2 individuals who lost their lives, seeing their families mourn, and visiting those in the hospital who are still now in the hospital. I start with this because I believe the nation and the world should know the resilience of this community, but also the impact on this community. Why I cannot think of this hearing being more timely, because part of what we're doing here is to confront the lack of humanity and to attack the lack of a humanitarian face on this phenomenon of immigration that has been part of the history of the United States for every single person that has come here, short of those who came as slaves and short of those who were Native Americans. We have a history of immigration. And I, too, have served and interacted and worked on immigration issues for more than 20 years. I served as a ranking member on the Immigration Subcommittee, and I have seen both Republican and Democratic administrations have at least some compassion, starting with President Reagan, whether you liked the wholeness of his legislation, had some compassion in recognizing that our nation is a land of laws but it is a land of immigrants. So we are here to not attack without facts. I believe we are here to shine the light on the unlawful behavior of this administration. There is no lawful construct for the migrant program. There are no laws to support the migrant program. And I went to a migration center in Juarez. 13,000 were on the list. Many were living without resources. There are no resources for those who are pushed over to the border. This is an unlawful process. And then the idea of metering. I cannot fathom a human being being metered. That is a product. That is meat. That is fruit. That is bread. It is not a child. It is not a mother. It is not a father. It is not the 2-year-old found face down in water because they had to go through an illegal crossing and not cross in a legal crossing. So today we're going to expose and go back to Washington to challenge this administration on the unlawfulness of this process. Finally, let me say that I've been on the road this week, as we all are, and we were in Pittsburgh dealing with the heinousness of the Tree of Life. And it is no doubt, there is no doubt, that those of us, this committee and other committees who have been focusing on domestic terrorism and the idea of terrorism, dealing with white supremacy and white nationalism, understand that racism, white supremacy, white nationalism is a national security threat. And you do that threat with an easily accessible automatic weapon. So today, we're going to face all of those issues and expose them, and then we will, as a committee, return to Washington and be problem solvers and ask the administration to stop its unlawful activity. Thank you for having us here. Thank you so very much.
So it's always difficult to follow Representative Jackson-Lee. Her ability to speak truth to power continues to inspire every member of our caucus, I know. And it's a privilege for me and Veronica and Sylvia to be able to learn from her on the Judiciary Committee. My name is Joe Neguse. I have the great privilege of representing Colorado's 2nd Congressional District. This is my first visit to El Paso, and I have been so moved by the warmth and the generosity of the people here in this community and have learned firsthand what it means to be El Paso strong. And I do want to just associate myself with the remarks of my colleague, Representative Jayapal and Chairman Nadler and Representative Jackson-Lee, and that is with respect to the leadership of Veronica Escobar. We both came into Congress together as freshmen. And as I think about the last 9 months, it's being a member of Congress and being a freshman member of Congress, setting up your district office, doing constituent work, all that entails. It's a great privilege and it's a great honor and it's a responsibility. And her ability to show incredible leadership under very trying circumstances that this community has had to endure over the last 9 months is nothing short of incredible. And we are lucky to have her, certainly as a freshman colleague in the Congress, and the Congress itself is lucky to have her leadership. And I think this community is lucky to have her as your representative. It's clear, I don't know that I could say it any better than my colleagues today, but when there is hateful and dehumanizing rhetoric being deployed against immigrants, we know that it's time for a change. When you have hateful and destructive immigration policies being executed and implemented by this administration, we know that it is time for a change. When you have people, young and old, being massacred at a retail store, we know that it is time for a change. I happen to come from a state that is no stranger to gun violence. In Aurora, Highlands Ranch, Columbine, and I would just say to Veronica and to the people of El Paso, the people of Colorado stand with you, that we stand with you shoulder to shoulder against hate and against the violence that has become so pervasive across our country. I was particularly moved last night, Representative Escobar, took me and Pramila to the memorial outside of the Walmart here. And to be able to see the faces of those members of this community who we lost, and to see the incredible support from this community for them and their families. There was a quote, it was one note of condolence that was written on the wall with the fence. And it's a quote that I've often relied on this last 2 years with so much hate in the public domain. And it's a quote from Dr. King, which is that love, I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And it was written on the fence last night. And as I was talking to my wife last night about the trip and what we had seen so far, I shared that with her because she's often heard me rely on that quote in the past. And if I could think of any other quote to better reflect the feeling that I have felt here in El Paso, I don't know that I could come up with a better quote. It is that, because this community has clearly chosen to stick with love, because they've recognized that hate is too great a burden to bear. And so, as Representative Jackson-Lee said, I think this hearing will be an effective way to show a light on the hate that this community and so many others have had to endure, so that we can go about solving it and preventing it. With that, I'm now honored to be able to introduce our next speaker, who of course is no stranger to you all here in El Paso. It also happens to be her birthday, so we're very excited to have her here for the hearing. I had to reveal that, and that's my freshman colleague, Representative Sylvia Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, colleagues. And I can frankly think of no better way to celebrate my birthday but to be here in El Paso, to stand with El Paso and my dear friend, Veronica Escobar. I can tell you that Houston stands with El Paso, and we stand with El Paso not just today, but every day until we do something to end gun violence, until we do something and take action to end the rhetoric that leads to a lot of this violence. And I think that's what we'll be looking at today, to look at the connection, to see what is really, really going on in our country, not just here, but across America. I've been here before, and I've been here to focus on some of the issues at the border. And I remember when Veronica talked about having a field hearing here many months ago, Mr. Chairman, and she said, I want a field hearing. And little did we know that such a tragic incident would happen, and that we're here today not only to talk about the border issues, but to talk to the connection between the rhetoric and the white supremacy and the rise in that in our country ties now to gun violence and that horrific event that happened here now 3-4 weeks ago. This is personal, very personal for so many of us. We're Latinas, we're Latinos. They've come after us. We've got to do something to make sure they don't do it again, and we've got to do something to make sure that no one targets people of color, targets vulnerable populations, targets the poor, targets the LGBT community, or any community, because hate is just a really bad 4-letter word. You know, my faith tells me that we should love everybody. My mother told me to not have hate in my heart. So for me, it's almost incomprehensible that somebody would do that. But hopefully today we'll get some answers. Hopefully today we'll get some solutions. Hopefully today we'll get some recommendations that we can put into effective public policy for this country. So I look forward to the hearing today. And Veronica, thank you again for all your work and your leadership on this issue. I look forward to today's hearings. Thank you very much.
So you can see El Paso is very fortunate to have these champions of democracy, champions for justice, champions for humanity here in our great community today to listen to our panelists, learn, and then we go off to legislate. In Spanish, very quickly, I want to say, estoy muy agradecida con mis colegas Les doy las gracias por venir al Paso para tener esta discusión tan importante sobre la política de la administración del presidente Trump, las consecuencias de las palabras que él ha usado, para poder saber cómo vamos a ir adelante, cuáles son los cambios que necesitamos hacer, cómo vamos a poder controlar lo que está pasando para que ninguna otra comunidad tenga que sufrir como la comunidad de nosotros. We have time for just a couple of questions because we've got to let folks in. Bob, and then right over here.
It's obvious here that all 6 members present are members of the majority party, and there are no Republicans here. What does that say about the opportunities to address the issues that you're here if the other party isn't even in the room?
And what did Republicans invited say?
Well, first, there were a couple who RSVP'd. I'm going to defer to the chairman, who backed out at the last moment. So, obviously we prefer every member of the subcommittee be here with us. I know that the committee staff worked very diligently to find a date that worked for the most people. It came as a surprise to me that they backed out. But, Chairman, anything you'd like to add?
It's unfortunate that the couple of Republicans we thought were going to come did back out. What it says about the Republicans, I'm not sure that I can say anything more than anybody else in this room can say. It's speculated. It says either that they don't really care about these issues or that they're intimidated by the president and the administration, or maybe both. But we have the majority in the House. We will take action and hopefully pressure from the American people as they get to know more and more about what's actually happening and what's being done in their name, will move the Senate to act too.
Primeramente, la persona que mató a los paseños y nuestros vecinos de Ciudad Juárez, él es responsable para las acciones que él tomó, pero todavía hay riesgo de que cosas como estas pasen, porque todavía tenemos un país donde no hemos buscado soluciones juntos para la violencia, y tenemos colegas en el Partido Republicano que no han hecho el esfuerzo de decirle al presidente que no debemos de aceptar las palabras que él ha usado. Y ellos mismos también a veces usan esas mismas palabras. Por eso reuniones como esta son tan importantes, porque el público americano necesita saber lo que está pasando, las consecuencias de la política y las consecuencias de las palabras, porque nosotros podemos hacer cambios. Es en nuestro poder si queremos hacer esos cambios. Maybe one more. Oh, Camilla?
I just wanted to say something in response to the first question about immigration and our Republican colleagues not being here. And I wanted to point out that it's very unfortunate that immigration has become such a partisan issue from the perspective of our colleagues. That is not true across the country. And I wish our colleagues would follow the lead of the American people, who I believe, if you look at polling on immigration and immigrants across this country today, it is at a high, a 5-year high in terms of people believing that we need immigrants in this country, that immigrants contribute to this country, that they would rather see immigration expanded, not contracted. But unfortunately, this is only my second term, so I've been here for 3 years now, but what we have seen consistently, both in my first term when we were in the minority, but now in the majority, is that immigrants have become the thing to bash with. Anytime the president seems to be in trouble, he goes back to immigrant bashing. And unfortunately, our Republicans follow along with that. That was not always the case. Just imagine, just 6 years ago in 2013, There was a comprehensive immigration reform bill that some of my colleagues here worked on in the House, but that bill passed the Senate with 68 bipartisan votes. Can you imagine anything today passing with 68 bipartisan votes? But this was a comprehensive reform of the immigration system. And so I think it is really unfortunate that our Republican colleagues are not here, because they would get to hear the consequences of these policies that they refuse to stand up and counter. And it comes to us as Democrats, but then to Republicans, independents, and Democrats across the country who know that this action, these policies, and these actions of this president do not reflect the foundation of who we are as a country, or what the American people actually know to be true, which is immigrants build our country. They are resilient. We are resilient. I say that as one of 14 members of Congress who is an immigrant myself, serving as a naturalized citizen in the United States Congress.
To what happened here in El Paso? And then what do you look at as the departure point that kind of rhetoric has been normalized and is in the mainstream now in the United States of America?
So I want to be very clear, because I want to make sure that the domestic terrorist who came into our community, drove 600 miles to be here, that he is held responsible for his actions and that he's not going to blame it on someone else. So he is responsible for the trigger that he pulled, the lives that he took, and the people that he injured, and the community that he damaged. I'm gonna draw that line in my opening statement, so I don't want to go through it because we've got to open the doors for folks and let them in. But we really, in the answer that I gave earlier in Spanish, we can change things. The American people have the power to change this. The goal of our committee and the work that we are doing is to shed light on what is happening, the human price that we're paying, and to leave it to the American public. We're going to legislate. We're going to vote on spending bills. We're going to vote on reform bills. We are going to do everything within our power, including educating the American public. But ultimately, it is in the hands of the people to create change, to say this is not acceptable, to say those of you who have stood silently or who have enabled or who have emboldened this, we are done with you. With that, you all, we really have to open the doors. Oh, one more thing.
I totally want to second what Congresswoman Escobar said, but I want to just say the following. Obviously, the actions that that individual took are his actions, his responsibility. But there is also a direct line from the rhetoric that we have heard from the president, calling immigrants thugs and rapists, invaders, infestation of this country. The murderer in his own manifesto used some of the same terms, practically quoted it. There's an old legal saying, I forget the exact wording, but basically fomenting a riot is not an excuse for riot. But you shouldn't be fomenting riots either. And that's a very direct responsibility of the rhetoric of the president of the administration, because that rhetoric is targeting immigrant communities, is targeting communities of color, and you know from history that some people are going to take up that cudgel.
We need you guys all to be able to get to the back, so thank you all very much. We're going to let the public in, so all the cameras move to the back.
Is this yours?
We're going to move 5 o'clock.
You're always so kind.